Welcome to the deep dive, where we crack open complex topics and pull out the insights that truly matter. Imagine you're a detective, right? You're trying to figure out if a new treatment is really causing a patient's improvement or if it's, their genetics, their diet, maybe even the weather. Health data is incredibly noisy, and isolating true cause and effect can feel like finding a needle in a haystack. Today, we're embarking on a deep dive into an ingenious statistical method that acts like a scientific magnifying glass, the self-controlled case series, or SCCS method. Our mission is to unpack its brilliance, understand why it's such a powerful tool, and see what it reveals about critical health decisions, especially concerning drug and vaccine safety. It's a statistical innovation that truly helps us cut through the noise.
And this investigation couldn't be more timely. I mean, in the world of pharmacoepidemiology, where we're awash in vast amounts of data, and the public rightly has a keen interest in understanding the potential effects of medicines and vaccines. Well, having robust and efficient methods isn't just helpful, it's absolutely essential. SCCS offers a unique and, frankly, incredibly precise lens to scrutinize these associations.
All right, let's pull back the curtain on this statistical detective then. What is the fundamental idea behind the self-controlled case series method? How does it actually work at its most basic level?
Well, at its core, SCCS is a method designed to study the timing of an event in relation to a time-varying exposure. Think of the exposure as something that starts and stops, like, say, receiving a vaccine or beginning a new medication. The event is typically an acute occurrence, like an adverse reaction. What's truly unique, though, is that SCCS focuses only on individuals who actually experience the event of interest. We're only looking at the cases.
Only the cases. That sounds incredibly focused, almost. Counterintuitive. How can you possibly draw robust conclusions without a separate group of people who didn't have the event? Isn't a control group usually like the cornerstone?
Yeah, this is where the real genius and the self-control name comes in. Each individual in the study effectively serves as their own control.
Their own control.
Exactly. Instead of comparing one person to a different matched person, you're comparing that same individual to themselves at different points in time. This is a huge advantage because it implicitly controls for all those time-invariant confounders factors that don't change within a person's observation period.
Ah.
Things like their genetic predispositions, their sex, their permanent location, or any underlying long-standing health conditions. They're simply factored out by design.
Because you're comparing apples to apples with the same apple.
Precisely. You got it.
So it's like having a perfect clone for every experiment, but it's actually just the same person at a different time. That's a truly ingenious way to address those tricky, confounding variables that are usually so hard to account for.
It really is. So for each person, we define an observation period. Within this period, we mark out risk periods. These are specific windows of time during or immediately after the exposure when we suspect the event might be more likely. All other times within that individual's observation period are designated as control periods. The method then estimates relative incidences. Think of it like this. If a relative incidence is, say, 2, the event is twice as likely during the risk period compared to the control period for that same person.
Okay.
It's basically a score telling you how much more or less frequently something happens when the exposure is present compared to when it's not within that individual.
It's a remarkably clever approach. Where did this method come from? When did this detective tool first appear on the scene?
Yeah, it was first introduced back in 1995, specifically to study associations between vaccines and adverse events. It really gained wider recognition, I'd say, and broader adoption after its use in a pretty significant study looking at the association between the MMR vaccine mumps, measles, rubella, and autism. It wasn't just another statistical tool. It really proved its worth in tackling one of the most contentious public health debates, showing its unique power.
Right. Let's ground this then. Let's use a classic real-world example from the sources. The association between that MMR vaccine and idiopathic thrombocytopenic purpura, or ITP. This seems like one of those cases where understanding the method really highlights the findings.
Absolutely. ITP, for those who might not know, is a rare autoimmune disorder. It causes abnormal bleeding because your platelet count gets really low. The study we're talking about focused on ITP cases in the UK, specifically in children aged 12 to 23 months, which is, a common age for getting that primary MMR vaccination.
Okay, so what did the SCCS analysis actually find? What did it reveal about MMR and ITP?
Well, the study defined 3 specific 2-week risk periods after the MMR vaccination. 0-14 days, 15-28 days, and 29-42 days. And the results showed a significant increase in the risk of ITP, specifically during that middle window. the 15-28-day period after receiving the MMR vaccine.
A significant increase. How much?
The relative incidence was calculated at 5.95. So children in that 15 to 28-day window were almost 6 times more likely to develop ITP than during their own non-exposed period.
6 times? Wow.
Yeah, and importantly, the statistics around that, the confidence interval showed it was a very solid, reliable connection, not just a random blip.
That's a very specific window of increased risk. But hang on, what if some children in the study had ITP more than once, multiple admissions? How does SCCS handle recurrent events like that? Because, one event might influence another, right? Real life isn't always neat.
That's a critical question, and it ports directly to one of the method's key assumptions, the independence of recurrent events. If one event actually makes another more or less likely they're not independent, then applying SCCS using only the first event is often the recommended approach to avoid potential bias.
Ah, I see. So you just look at the first time it happens.
Often, yes. And in the ITP example, they did exactly that. When they reran the analysis using only the first ITP event for each child, that relative incidence for the 15-28-day period actually increased to 7.1 ton.
Even higher?
Yes,
Okay.
which suggests the initial analysis, the one including all events, might have actually been slightly biased toward finding no effect or a smaller effect. It really shows how understanding your data's characteristics like recurrence dramatically influences the findings you get.
Okay, so the independence of recurrent events, that's rule number 1 for our statistical detective. What other crucial assumptions need to hold true for SCCS to give us reliable results? What are the other rules of the game?
Right. The second key assumption is that the occurrence of the event, like getting ITP, must not alter the probability of subsequent exposure. So getting the vaccine, for instance. The exposure is always assumed to be an outside factor. Time varying, yes, but its timing isn't supposed to be influenced by whether or not the person already had the event.
Okay. Can you give us a scenario where that assumption might be broken and how researchers cleverly adapt SCCS to handle it?
Sure. Let's stick with the ITP and MMR example. It's quite plausible, isn't it, that if a child develops ITP, their doctor might delay or even withhold the MMR vaccine until they've fully recovered.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So this creates a period before the vaccination where ITP events are actually less likely to occur, simply because the child is recovering. If you don't account for this sort of event-free period right before exposure, it could artificially inflate the apparent risk after the exposure.
Making the vaccine look riskier than it is.
Potentially, yes. So, to address this, researchers can include what's called a pre-exposure risk period in their analysis. Basically, they look at the time right before vaccination, too. In the ITP study, they analyzed a 28-day pre-risk period, and guess what? No ITP events were found, which confirmed that, in practice, vaccinations weren't happening during a child's ITP recovery. And that's vital information for getting accurate, unbiased estimates of the vaccine's actual effect.
That's very clever. So we've got independence of events, event not influencing exposure. Is there a third main assumption?
Yes, there is. And it's a subtle one, but important, especially with severe outcomes. The third assumption is that the occurrence of the event of interest must not censor or affect the observation period itself.
What does that mean exactly?
It means the length of time you observe each individual needs to be independent of when the event occurs within that period. Now, this could be violated if, for example, the event itself is likely to result in death. Death obviously cuts short the individual's observation time.
Right. It ends the observation.
Exactly. Now, while methods do exist to adapt SCCS for these curtailed observation periods, it's definitely a critical factor to consider for certain events. Interestingly, though, some simulations, like in studies looking at heart attacks after infection or vaccination, have suggested that the bias introduced by this curtailment might sometimes be, well, negligible. But it's something you absolutely have to think about.
Okay, so SCCS comes with these specific rules and considerations. Given that, why would researchers choose it over, say, more traditional methods like cohort studies or case control studies? What are its really distinct advantages? Why pick this tool?
Well, what's truly fascinating here is SCCS's power in specific, often quite complex scenarios. Let's look at some direct comparisons from the sources that really highlight its unique strengths. First off, efficiency. Take studies on febrile convulsions and the MMR vaccine. A large traditional cohort study found a relative risk of about 2.83. Then, a case series study using SCCS looked at the same question but with a smaller number of cases. It produced a very similar relative incidence, 3.04, but crucially, with a narrower confidence interval.
Meaning more precision.
Exactly, more statistical precision.
Yeah.
It tells us SCCS can be highly efficient, giving greater certainty sometimes with less data, especially when the risk period you're interested in is short.
Okay. Efficiency is one point. What else?
Its incredible strength in controlling for bias. This is a big one. Consider asthma and the influenza vaccine. A traditional cohort study initially found a crude rate ratio of 3.29, suggesting the vaccine tripled the risk. After trying very hard to adjust for many factors like sex, age, how severe the asthma was, and so on, they managed to adjust it down, but only to 1.39, still suggesting some increased risk. However, an SCCS analysis performed on the exact same population found a relative incidence of 0.98.
0.98. That's basically 1.0, no effect. That's a huge difference from 1.39, let alone 3.29. What does that tell us?
It tells us SCCS effectively eliminated something called indication bias or confounding by indication. Think about it. Children with more severe asthma are probably more likely to be recommended and receive the influenza vaccine, right?
Right, because they're more vulnerable.
Exactly. So in a cohort study, it can look like the vaccine is causing asthma events, when really it's just that the sicker kids, who are more prone to events anyway, are the ones getting vaccinated. Traditional studies struggle to perfectly adjust for this unless they capture every single nuance of severity. But SCCS, by using the individual as their own control, well, it implicitly removes this bias entirely. It's a game changer for these kinds of questions.
That's really powerful. And how does it stack up against case control studies?
Good question. There was a study on hip fractures and tricyclic antidepressants. A case control study found an odds ratio of 4.76, suggesting a strong link. In contrast, an SCCS analysis on similar data yielded a relative incidence of 2.30, still showing a risk but substantially lower. In situations like this, SCCS estimates are often considered more accurate because they neatly sidestep the inherent problems of selection bias, how you pick your controls, and that indication bias we just talked about, which can really plague case control studies too.
Okay, so SCCS offers these unique strengths, particularly around bias control. What does this mean for you, the listener, whether you're a researcher looking at data or just someone curious about how these critical health studies actually work?
Well, it means SCCS is exceptionally good at controlling for those fixed confounders, things that don't change within a person, and at tackling that tricky indication bias. When the right kind of data is available, you need dates of exposure and dates of events for individuals. It's often recommended, actually, to perform an SCCS analysis alongside traditional cohort or case control studies.
As a sort of cross-check.
Exactly. If the estimates from these different study designs agree, it significantly strengthens the overall findings, gives you more confidence. But if they disagree, well, that doesn't necessarily mean one is wrong. Instead, it can provide crucial insights into potential sources of bias that might be lurking in the different study designs. It helps you understand why they might differ, deepening our understanding of what's really going on.
It sounds like the SCCS method hasn't stood still either. It's evolved beyond those initial applications. What are some of the more advanced techniques we're seeing now?
Oh, absolutely. The method has definitely become more sophisticated over time. One really important refinement is the semi-parametric case series approach.
Semi-parametric, what does that add?
Okay, so the initial SCCS model often assumes age effects are sort of step-like constant within maybe a few broad age groups you define beforehand. But what if age effects risk more smoothly, like a gradual ramp rather than steps? If you get those predefined age groups wrong, it can actually bias your results. The semi-parametric model is clever because it doesn't force age into predefined boxes. It allows the age effect to be estimated more flexibly, directly from the data itself. This provides more reliable estimates, especially when age is a really strong confounder, changing risk significantly over the observation period. For instance, in a reanalysis of hepatitis B vaccination and multiple sclerosis where age is a big factor, this semi-parametric model gave the most reliable estimates because it could handle that age confounding much better than even a standard SCCS model with lots of fiddly age groups.
That makes sense, letting the data speak more for itself regarding age. Now, what about those tricky situations you touched on earlier, interferent events, where the event itself might actively stop or change future exposures, like a bad reaction making someone stop a drug, or even death? That seems to break the rules.
It does, you're right. Standard SCCS assumptions are violated in those scenarios. But again, the method has been ingeniously adapted. It's quite flexible. For exposures that only happen once, like maybe a single specific vaccine dose in a series, you can sometimes just redefine the observation period to start at the exposure time and only look forward. But for multiple exposures or more complex back-and-forth scenarios, researchers use something called pseudo-likelihood methods.
Pseudo-likelihood. Sounds complex.
It's a bit technical, but the idea is to mathematically handle the fact that you have missing exposure information after the event occurs. The event interfered, so you don't know what exposures would have happened. Imagine trying to figure out how well a car performs, but it keeps breaking down mid-test drive, right? Cutting short your data. Standard SCCS would struggle. Pseudo-likelihood is like having smart statistical tools that let you still get a really good estimate of its performance, even with those incomplete runs, by cleverly working with the data you do have.
Okay, like statistically filling in the gaps.
In a very principled way, yes. For example, a study looked at bupropion, that's a smoking cessation therapy, and the risk of sudden death. They used this adapted approach because, well, death clearly stops any further exposure. They found no evidence of an association between bupropion and sudden death, although, interestingly, they did find an increased risk of seizures using the same method. Another example involved the oral polio vaccine and intussusception, that's a serious bowel obstruction. Again, they used these adaptations and found no significant change in intussusception incidence after vaccination.
The applications seem incredibly broad then, far beyond just vaccines.
Indeed. Another really exciting area is using SCCS for sequential pharmacovigilance.
Sequential meaning watching over time.
It's about prospectively monitoring the safety of new drugs or vaccines in near real time as they're rolled out to the public. There's a sequential variant of SCCS, often using something called the sequential probability ratio test, or SPRT. This helps health agencies detect potential safety signals much more quickly than waiting for a traditional study to finish. For example, existing data on the influenza vaccine and Bell's palsy, that's a type of facial paralysis, was reanalyzed using this sequential method. It nicely demonstrated how you can use SCCS to continuously monitor for adverse events over successive time intervals, say month by month, allowing for really early detection if a risk starts to emerge, or providing ongoing confirmation of safety.
So, from its elegant self-controlled design, controlling for all that individual baseline stuff, to these sophisticated applications in real-time safety monitoring, the self-controlled K-series method truly is a powerful, versatile statistical tool. It's quite a testament to ingenuity in data analysis.
It absolutely is, and it really underscores how these innovative methodologies allow us to extract critical insights from incredibly complex health data. This leads to a deeper, much more nuanced understanding of these temporal associations, the timing between exposures and health outcomes, and ultimately, that contributes significantly to public health and safety.
This deep dive really reveals that by designing our studies thoughtfully and by carefully considering these statistical nuances, we can uncover information that might otherwise just be lost in the noise. And this refined knowledge helps inform some of the most crucial health decisions we face, both as individuals and, as a society. So what does this all mean for you listening in?
Well, next time you encounter a study, maybe in the news or online, linking a particular exposure, a drug, a vaccine, maybe even something environmental to a specific health event, pause and consider the methodology they used. Ask yourself, does it compare individuals only to themselves, like SCCS does? Does it seem to account well for time-varying factors, or those potential biases we talked about, like indication biases? Our journey today shows that the statistical lens we choose can dramatically shape our understanding of the world. And knowing a little bit about that lens empowers you to interpret findings more critically, more confidently.
A truly insightful look at the sophisticated, often hidden detective work that goes on behind the health data we rely on. It's not just about the numbers, but how we get them.